Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marie Krulowich Brown. I am the Executive and Artistic Director for ISH, and we are so excited to be partnering with Cincinnati Skirball Museum and Hebrew Union College for this incredible program this afternoon, Archie Rand in conversation with Samantha Baskin. So thank you so much for joining us. We see a couple of repeat offenders here, so thanks to those who were able to join us last week. And if you're interested in graphic Jews and storytelling through art, and specifically comic arts, I hope that you'll join us, not next Wednesday, we're taking the holiday week off, but on December 2nd. And I see our featured artist, Isaac, is with us today. So thank you, Isaac, and thank you everyone for joining us. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Abby Schwartz, Director of Skirball Museum, who's my partner today.
Hi, Marie, and hello, everyone. So great to be with all of you today. Again, a lot of familiar faces and some new ones as well. And so happy to be here to introduce our esteemed speakers. Dr. Samantha Baskind, Professor of Art History at Cleveland State University and curator of the exhibition Archie Rand, 60 Paintings from the Bible, which opened at the Skirball on February 18th and closed abruptly on March 11th, the day before Samantha was to deliver a lecture because of the pandemic. The good news is that Skirball is open again for individual visitors with a reservation, Tuesdays and Thursdays from 11 to 4. And I know you'll want to visit now that it's open, especially after hearing from Archie and Samantha today. Dr. Baskind is the author of 5 books on modern Jewish art and co-editor of the Jewish graphic novel Critical Approaches, the foundational volume in the field. Her book addresses subjects ranging from fine art to film and comics and graphic novels. She has published over 100 articles and reviews in academic journals, museum catalogs, edited collections, encyclopedias, and the popular press. She is a 2020 National Endowment for the Humanities Research Fellow. Her area of study is Moses Jacob Ezekiel, a 19th century Jewish sculptor. I also am so happy to have with us Archie Rand, Presidential Professor of Art at Brooklyn College, Guggenheim Fellow, and recipient of the National Foundation for Jewish Culture's Achievement Medal. Archie Rand has been one of the major progenitors of Jewish subject matter for the past 4 decades and is widely recognized as the most innovative and prolific painter on Jewish themes today. He has had over 100 solo exhibitions, and his work has been included in more than 200 group exhibitions. Rand's work can be found in the permanent collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, among others. We're thrilled to have Archie's ambitious, groundbreaking series on view at the Skirball, his earliest series on a Jewish theme, painted in his signature comic book style. Please join me in welcoming Professor Samantha Baskin and Professor Archie Rand in conversation about 60 paintings from the Bible and the inspirations that comics brought to this body of work.
Thank you, Abby. It is my pleasure to be here with Archie and you and the entire audience. And I love that Archie's show is at the Skirball. It is a fabulous show, and I hope a lot of you will come see it. And it's such an interesting show. It's, as Abby said, it's Archie's earliest series. It's on a Jewish theme in a comic book style. And it's his largest series to this moment. So it's really pivotal to his entire body of work. And each loosely painted canvas in this series measures 18 by 24 inches. And you'll see that if you haven't seen them in person yet, you'll see on these slides that they portray familiar moments from the Hebrew Bible or the Apocrypha. Most are rendered expressionistically in a comic book technicolor kind of style, really bright, energetic colors, and some aren't, and Archie's going to talk to us about that. But in general, these canvases in the series, in both text and image, offer unexpected rereadings designed to make viewers think twice about these proverbial tales. So I'm going to put up some slides and let's hear more from Archie about the series and the influence of comics on his work. This is the first image in the series. It's always good to start at the beginning, and he'll give you a sense of the kind of colors that he uses, his speech bubbles. And let me just say that Archie once told me that this series, 60 Paintings from the Bible, are old friends of his, and they tip the balance in his art. So let's hear him say a little bit more about that, beginning with this first image.
Sure. Am I on? I'm seeing this image here.
Yes.
I can be heard? Excellent. Well, in 1974, I was given a commission to paint a synagogue in Brooklyn. And at the time, there were a number of painters with whom I was associated that were working in the modernist style. And I was rebuffed from that group for working both figuratively and religiously. Religiously was probably the biggest problem. And I had to make a decision at that point as to whether or not I was interested in working with Jewish themes. And I decided that I was, and I sort of left that group, even though I was socially accepted by those people. My work was not. But I decided that since it hadn't been done, as I mentioned in the introduction to the 613, Robert Mapplethorpe says that these pictures hadn't been made and somebody had to make them. It might as well be him. And I shared that feeling. I had not seen modern artists delve into Jewish subject matter, mostly out of shame. There was a certain kind of shame in the assimilative trajectory of Jews in America. I wanted to work on something that would identify itself as Jewish. I had done a number of Jewish commissions, most notably a series that I had done, which was not a commission, which was the 54 chapters of the Bible, which the Jewish Museum was reticent to show because they said it was too Jewish. And they finally did by contextualizing it with some other people who, many of whom, with the exceptions of Alan Wexler and the great Helene Alon, many of whom were sort of making fun of their Jewishness, which was an expected stance, which I did not care for. And after that, I realized that I'd already let the cat out of the bag, and I was tired of taking orders from rabbis as to what was and wasn't kosher imagery. The 54 chapter paintings from the Torah, I was trying to be textually extremely obedient. While this was going on, I had been looking at people like Art Spiegelman, of course, looking at earlier comic works, most notably of Will Eisner, who was very upfront about his Jewishness. And I decided to drop the need for rabbinic approval, realizing that there was very little visual information in the diaspora history of Judaism, which was exiled basically by both external factors and internal factors. That is, once the rabbis had the oral Torah, images were not acceptable because they added a subjective interpretation, which the rabbis could not tolerate. And that's understandable. But I figured it was time for a change for whatever reasons. And this was the first series where I decided to take the Bible as imagery and approach it without rabbinic sanction. That is, formally, if some rabbi said to me, "What's that?" and I couldn't explain it, it would be deemed sacrilegious. With this series, I no longer cared. I wanted to do something that was identifiably biblical, identifiably Jewish, and also identifiably current. I wasn't going to use speech bubbles that said thee and thou and, you know, whatever that King James Version stuff was, or even the more complex English translations done by recent rabbinic scholars. There was something very leaden about all that. And reading some of the original Hebrew, I realized that what actually happens in the verbiage of the Bible is stunning prose, and the English translations fail to capture the immediacy and the power of the Hebrew poetry, which is all through the Bible. So the translations that I made, Adam saying we're naked, is not specifically from the Bible, but it's the realization that Adam and Eve have after eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge. The colors that I chose to use, Samantha, if it's okay with you, I'm going to go on for this because it'll explain a lot. Mm-hmm. I thought that if I drew it in a way that was aesthetically admissible, that is, if I drew it in a kind of classical style or a traditional academic style, the viewer would be lulled into accepting the image. But if I continued to model it in that style, it would fall back into the illustration that I was trying to get away from. So I superimposed on top of that drawing expressionistic paint handling and color that was derived from the German expressionist, notably, or the Russian expressionist tradition. I was looking at people, as we'll see later. Yes, of course, I'm preceded by many great artists. Notably, there's the wonderful Titian on the wall. I think almost every great artist in the European tradition tackled this subject. This particular one is copied from the works of Matthaus Merian. I'll get into that later as we discuss Marian's work. But as a kid, near the Whitney Museum on Madison Avenue, there were a number of galleries right adjacent to the Whitney, the most memorable of which to me was the Hutton Hutchnecker Gallery, and they specialized in showing German and Russian expressionists. And as a young painter, this floored me. You'd see people like Carl Schmidt-Rottluff and notably in my experience, August Mack, whose watercolors just destroyed me. I'd never seen color like that except maybe in Bonnard reproductions. And I chose to as I said, superimpose that kind of color onto the classical drawing.
I think what's interesting,
yes,
is to say there's nothing irreligious about these pictures. It's exactly what's going on, but they're painted in a way that makes them become available. And that the notion of making something so sacred available is, you know, it is very touchy. And we're looking at Titian, it's a classical Renaissance rendition of the exact same story. And so that brings us to your influences, which you mentioned, like Marian. And this is a good example of Marian and the artist that inspired you. So we're looking at your Solomon, so Archie's version of Solomon on the left versus the precedent, Matthias Marian's image on the right, which is a print. So Archie, can you tell us a little bit about this and expand on it?
Sure. Initially, I was looking for totally different subject matter. I was looking at Marian's daughter's work, which I was first familiar with, Anna Maria Sibylla Marian, who had done pioneering work in scientific illustration. She had done insects and botanical work, which was extraordinary. It was really the first time, I think, in European history that somebody went to the trouble of detailing this encyclopedic analysis of natural phenomena. And then I read that her father was a famous Swiss copperplate engraver whom I hadn't heard of, named Matthias Marian. And while I was reading this, I saw that he had done a Bible. And I said, oh, cool. And I looked it up and I researched it. And I found this was exactly what I was looking for the next series. And that's how I stumbled on Marian's work. Some of Marian's work has been reproduced in color, which looked exactly like a comic book. And he also coupled his images with a kind of poetic prose translation of the Bible, all of which I found very accommodating to the way I was thinking. So he had, I believe, 77 copper plates, which he titled from the New Testament. And what I did was, because people ask me why there are 60, and there are so many times that the number 60 comes up in Hebrew liturgy and scripture. And I honestly have to say that of the, I believe, 77 images, I could be wrong, that the 60 that I selected were the ones that were either from the so-called Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible or the Apocrypha. And the ones that dealt with the Christian Bible, I simply chose not to touch because, again, I was interested in making a Jewish cohort out of this series. And, you know, the same thing I was saying before about the Adam and Eve. You can see the drawing on this is fairly much a quick sketch copy of the Marian engraving. And what I wanted to do was to make that somehow more enterable by splashing the paint around, which would give the viewer it gave myself a certain comfort, in fact, that I wasn't simply replicating an image, but I was making some transformative action on it that would read as a recent adaptation of this kind of illustration. We can get back there. So what Solomon is saying is, again, it's closer to what the Bible actually says, if you can read the original Hebrew, than what the English translation dutifully and obligatorily tries to convey. That is, the English translation isn't incorrect, but the Hebrew is much more direct. So Solomon is saying in this word bubble, you know, cut the kid in half and give 1/2 to each mother, which is actually what he says in the Hebrew. He doesn't say kid, but the whole tone of his grammar is very abrupt. And you can see that Solomon is really being, you know, very, very manipulative and very intelligent about this. And the English translation just doesn't catch it. And that's the temper that I took with this, this entire series. And it makes it sort of enjoyable. But again, you know, like a lot of the projects I've been dealing with, what I wanted to do was take this material and make it alive. I wanted to make it so it wasn't, you know, we would hush ourselves into the synagogue or for the church for that matter, which is also losing people. And say, you know, this stuff is, you know, if nothing else, it's interesting morality tales. You know, if nothing else, they serve as paradigms for a certain kind of communal behavior. And as such, they can be revisited without being castigated as organized religion. You can make this a personal religion. You can read your Bible, you can read your prayers. You know, here we go with Kirchner, another great expressionist, whose color palette you can see very nicely joined up with this picture of Samson, is basically replicated in my hand here. That's the color palette I was looking for. I was looking for something that was raucous, garish, outrageous. These all things that I consider very Jewish traits. Somebody wrote a book many years ago, I forgot the author, called The Ordeal of Civility, which is the kinds of pressures that these Socratic diaspora Jews, of which we all are now, have to somehow subjugate our enthusiasm to accommodate a more static social self-image. And I was just tired of that. So the words inside the bubble, you know, let me die with the Philistines, underlined exclamation point, as if it came out of a Batman comic. And the garish, unfiltered, unmodeled colors are not only an indication, but they're representative of the kind of vulgarity that I think as Jews, we have to take a certain kind of pride in, because that vulgarity has allowed great invention. You know, there is no invention without breaking an axiom. Albert Einstein says, in fact, that he simply chose to ignore an axiom. And that's part of this. Now, none of this is particularly revolutionary. What it is it's verifying. And there's a difference. It might be seen as revolutionary by the viewer, But what I wanted to do was verify the psychological and social condition of what it meant to be a contemporary Jewish cultural performer in this society. And, you know, the expressionist color, which is basically a slap in everyone's face, and the adaptation of that onto the drawing is my way of saying, you know, we live in a certain structured society, but within that society, you know, we should be proud of the invention that diaspora has forced upon us, and actually that we've inevitably been blessed with because of that.
And what's interesting is that you do use garish German expressionist color, but you have a varied color palette as well, depending on the subject, depending on your mood. And I think that this juxtaposition gives you an opportunity to talk about that. King David versus Jephthah's daughter, two very different subjects from
Yes.
the scriptures.
When I was a kid, I was fascinated by Delacroix's journals. Like many artists, Delacroix is one of my supreme pantheonic gods. And Delacroix writes that whenever you're doing a painting or a series, you always have to leave something screwed up in it. So that you basically, Picasso says most artists finish their painting the way the commandant finishes the execution, by putting a coup de grace bullet in the head. And Delacroix urges us to avoid that, to keep something electric in the picture. And when I got to Jephthah's daughter, I thought to myself, this is absolutely horrifying. Not that a lot of other things in this series, not that a lot of other narratives aren't horrifying, terrifying, scary, but this is personal. This is Jephthah coming home and realizing he's going to have to kill his daughter because he made a vow. Now, obviously, this legend, which has been incorporated into the Apocrypha, predates even pre-Mosaic Judaism. It's obviously a pagan tale going back to the time when babies are thrown into the fire. But I thought, you know, this is really, it's really terrifying on a personal level. And what I should do is simply highlight the word bubble, in a sense, so that the story becomes clear without the viewer having to focus on any aesthetic concerns. So the aesthetic concerns were removed in this picture, only highlighting in those yellow washes the two parties of people, one coming out in joy to greet the conquering general, and the other one to show the general's dismay, grief at what he's faced with. And I thought, let me just leave that one alone. So I wanted to increase the circumference of the technical and palette expression that was available in this series.
This particular juxtaposition also allows you to talk about color, but language again. Let's return to language and the language of God, or the common vernacular that the everyday man uses. And I think too, addressing the way you use speech bubbles and the pointers for the speech bubbles is really interesting.
Yes, I thought that, like when God talks to Moses and says, take off your shoes, you're on holy ground, he doesn't sound like Charlton Heston. He doesn't talk through an echo chamber. Otherwise, people wouldn't understand God. And there are questions as to, why aren't there miracles? And what I'm proposing is that there are millions and millions of miracles every day, and we can all attest to them. And God, whether or not one is a believer in the man with the white beard in the sky, or whether one simply in these days of logic needs an address for the receipt of gratitude or of grief. There has to be something external that we can relate to. And as such, when God talks to us, which God does in our conscious or subconscious, it's a language we can understand. God does not talk the King's English. God talks in language that's vernacular, so his meaning is, or her meaning, is clear. And in this particular one, Cyrus is being said, I'm God, I'll speak, and whatever I say will happen, exclamation point. And will happen fast, exclamation point. He says, so wise guy, I'll say the word and poof, you'll be history. That's what he hears. What he hears is, back off, buddy. I'm God. And if you do this, I'm going to turn you into sawdust, which is how they talk in the streets of Brooklyn. It's like, okay, I get it. That's a caution I can understand. God isn't saying, if thou darest to, crosseth the lineth, God doesn't do that. God talks to all of us very directly, every day, all the time. And that's what he hears. And, when Tobit in the Apocrypha is sitting under the eaves and the birds do droppings on his eyeballs, what he would say is, the birds shit in my eyes. He would not use nicer words. And I find in this case, in the case of the Ezekiel painting, the color is very loud and the word bubble has to be delved into. In the Tobit painting, I toned everything down to a wash so that the word bubble came forward. That was simply an aesthetic decision. I wish I could say something, more pithy about that, but I thought the color worked so well on the Ezekiel picture. I wanted the word bubble to fade a bit. Yeah, here's another case of something very, very similar. There is a lot of clean area around the Jeremiah picture, and God, this time coming from the sun, which is very Egyptian and pre-Mosaic, but I figured it had to come from somewhere. And since God made everything, the sun is a good place. And he says, don't tell me, you aren't a child, which is basically what God says. He says it almost exactly that way, because you're going to go wherever I send you and repeat whatever I tell you to say. That's a direct order. He's getting that very clearly, and he follows it through. And that's one of the more subtle pictures. I like the way that the arrow on the word bubble coincides with the angle of the tree and that falling thing in the sky there. In the Elijah picture, the paint handling is a bit more ramped up. There's a lot more impasto. There's more areas of straight blobs of color. And what you're left with is basically what you're left with in the Jephthah painting, is that the protagonists, Elijah and the angel, are sort of highlighted in yellow. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge to the viewer. Oh, by the way, that's what's happening. But I wanted the atmosphere that surrounded them. I wanted the situation to be consonant with the activities, and sort of lively. I was talking to Malcolm Morley, and I was mentioning something about his parrots, and he said, what are you talking about, figure field? And I said, well, not really, but what about figure field? And he said, well, there's no such thing as figure field or figure ground. They teach that nonsense in art school. He said, it's all figure. And I thought, way to go, Malcolm, that's absolutely right. So I wanted the situation in which Elijah is resting to manifest all the miraculous doings of God that in fact the angel would be doing. So Elijah and the angel, because they're drawn in a recognizable way, didn't really have to be modeled. But I wanted to do something, that wasn't static to the landscape that they were inhabiting in their little scenario there. Get up and eat.
I'm going to interrupt you because we want to get through some more slides.
Okay.
And, Archie's God is sometimes a bossy God, a God that's vexed by his people. And then we have the people vexed by God sometimes. And I think this particular juxtaposition in this image, we have Archie's, we got Abraham and Isaac here, the Akedah. And then, of course, we have Rembrandt's Sacrifice of Isaac, a classical rendition from 17th century Holland. And they're very different. But I think, and say something about these, but also I'm very interested in your use of the words in the speech bubble. It's clever, there's pathos there. So please address that as well.
Absolutely, you've hit it right on the head. Rembrandt is at the top of everyone's list of favorite painters, unless you're an idiot. Rembrandt's humanity is manifest in everything he does. Rembrandt's love is manifest in everything he does. And I was mentioning to Samantha recently that With the exception of Marc Chagall and Mary Cassatt, I can't think of any artist in Western history other than those three, Rembrandt, Mary Cassatt, and Marc Chagall, whose topic was interhuman love, and by analogy, the love that God has for his or her people. And one of the things that's most heartbreaking in the Rembrandt picture is it's not just surprise on Rembrandt's Abraham, but it's incredible relief. He doesn't have to do this. And for Rembrandt to be able to capture that, astounding, you know, Isaac's tacit willingness. I mean, you look at his feet and they're not twitching, they're sort of resolved in a way. Everyone is doing God's will, and the angel comes down and says, okay, knock it off. We get it. You know, you're a person of faith. And Rembrandt has Abraham basically saying, oh, thank you, God. He is so relieved. And that's just his love for Isaac and his gratitude to God coming through. Never thinking that there'd be any chance in my life or the afterlife for a painting of mine and a painting of Rembrandt's to be next to each other. I'm going to take this opportunity to tell you what I got from that painting, which is trying to get that feel. My quickly sketched Abraham has a very timidly held knife, and he's looking up at the sky, and his eyebrows are way up on top of his his forehead, and he's waiting for something to happen. He really doesn't want to do this at all, despite the fact he's been commanded. The angel's coming out of the sky, and in the Bible, Abraham says, "Hineni, I am here." And you know, most of the time when you hear that story, you hear it said very gravely, which is so counterindicated by what's actually going on. Rembrandt's about to kill his son, and he's not saying, "Yes, God, I am here." He's saying, "I'm here, find me fast before I do this, please." So there's double lines, wavy lines under it, and all the letters are in capital. And Abraham is just about to show the kind of relief that, but not quite, but he's getting ready for the possibility of that relief that Rembrandt's Abraham is showing. So thank you for that analogy, but that's what's going on here.
So I had the great pleasure, I've had the great pleasure of spending a lot of time with Archie. We worked on this show for a long time, and we talked many years before that. I think everyone should see how gorgeous his studio is. You get a sense of his use of series because there's different canvases stacked everywhere. It's a remarkable place. He hangs up works of art as the series are being made. So you can't see it in this slide, but on the far left at the end, he was working on an Esther series when we came to visit. At one point, his magnificent series, the 613, is boxed in the bottom left. It's on tour all the time. It was supposed to be in Rochester right now, but because of the pandemic, it's not. It will ultimately hang there.
Get back to that.
Oh, go back to that. What do you want to say?
What I want to say is the paintings on the wall, by the way, are all Jewish paintings. That is, the series closest to the right-hand frame is the 10 Plagues, and that's the River Nile turning into blood and the gold. The picture next to that with the big Aleph are 10 Jewish painters, the one in alphabetical order, or 10 Jewish artists, the Aleph representing Wallace Berman. The one next to it, the one behind my head and behind your children, are the 6 books of the Mishnah. And the one on the far end there are the dreams of the 12 tribes after a show of the 12 sons of Jacob that I saw by Zerberan at the Frick. So they're all Jewish series, which of course limits their availability to certain venues. But I've decided that's what I want to do. Now you can go.
This juxtaposition is interesting because now everybody can see another Marian, another precedent for Archie, but at the same time, he is not afraid to shy away from the minutia of the Bible. And Passover really allows him to explore that.
Yeah, this is the only one where I used a thin Sharpie because I had a lot to say. And this is basically exactly what the Commandments of Passover are. And the leader of the Seder in my picture is going through, excuse me, is going through the regimen or the order of the Seder, which is a redundancy. Seder meaning order, and he's saying, eat the lamb at night, roast it on a fire, eat it with matzah and bitter herbs. Saying this is what we're going to do, guys. And again, in this situation, the people are laid out in the Marian. Marian obviously is influenced by Da Vinci's Last Supper, and I somehow wanted to pull back from that and make it more of a communal roundtable. And the way I attempted to do that was to make the situation more dominant than the people. That is one of the things that Guston used to talk about, was it's not the what, it's the where. So in here, I don't know about your eye, but my eye, after I read the text, keeps focusing on that blue area in the left-hand corner. That's the relief from the red compression of the room. So I keep being aware that there's an outside, and therefore that life somehow continues. You'll notice in the Marian, that's not the case. In the Marian, we're focused basically on those figures and the darkness of the wall. So I did that shift consciously. I wanted the outside to be bright, indicating some kind of continuance and furtherance. In the Marian, it's introverted, and in mine, it's extroverted.
Archie, I think I'm going to skip forward a few slides so we don't run out of time before we get to talking a little bit about comics and the influence of comics on your work, and especially the position of Jews as so formative in comics. For example, in early comic books, Superman being created by two Jews, actually from Cleveland, where I am. So if you could tell us something, and I'll move through these slides and just let you say a few words about the beginnings of Jews in comics, and especially these superheroes as we move forward.
Well, one of the things that you'll find is that art in America was governed by the same kind of Calvinist Jewish restrictions that all other facets of upper society were. That is, the world of John Singer Sargent and William Merritt Chase was not going to be invaded by these stuck-up German Jews or these filthy Russian Polish Jews, and it was pretty obvious that there was no way to break that glass ceiling. So the artists who in fact were Jews either tried to work their way through and found that they were turned away at the gate. Very notable and wonderful artists like Jack Levine and Hyman Bloom, or they tried to break through with lesser success, like the Sawyer brothers, who wanted to be accepted as fine artists, and somehow found that they were continually being referred to as Jewish artists, even though they would paint ballerinas. So a number of these artists who were incredibly skilled formed the nucleus of a highly disreputable form of public expression, which was the comic book industry. And the comic book industry came out of equally disreputable trajectory of dime novels and police gazettes and all of these cheap paperback newsstand things that we were warned against even going near, that people would hide under their pillows. And eventually the pulp fiction novels came out in the early 30s, detective novels, bodice ripping novels, all of that stuff. And the comic books came out of this kind of illustrated novella. And little by little, they became more and more graphic. And the age of the readership went down to the point where they were seen as being dangerous. For instance, my folks would not let me have comic books except for Classics Illustrated. But if if an EC comic, God forbid, or a Batman or something came into the house, it would disappear the next day, seen as being a juvenile delinquent influence. So that was that was pervasive up until my childhood. The genius, one of the greatest artists of the 20th century, in the opinion of a number of us, of the comic book industry, was a man named Will Eisner. And Will Eisner, yes, Will Eisner. Will Eisner developed a way of drawing that took advantage of film noir camera angles and actually drew the viewer into a story in a way that simply wasn't, you know, Al Cap, you know, profiles talking to each other, or, you know, Dick Tracy stuff. This was, you know, serious perspectival and, you know, emotional work on the faces. And he gave birth in his studio to basically the artists who became the EC comic artists. Almost all of them had initially worked in his, under his tutelage. EC Comics, because of the blood, gore, violence, and just hysterical nonsense that went on, was censured by Congress. And those artists went on to form a parody of their censorship, which was Mad Magazine. And Mad was one of the most remarkable cultural artifacts in the history of the 20th century. I don't know any artist my age, and I'll say this, you know, not to be irreligious, I'll say it on a stack of Bibles. I don't know any artist my age who was not knocked out and influenced by the Mad Magazine of the 1950s and early 60s. It morphed after a while because during the Eisenhower years, you could be ironic, you could make fun of something. But when politics and the world outside itself became marinated in irony, you couldn't make anything ironic about something that was inherently ironic. So the whole velocity of that Mad Magazine energy dissipated and now, you know, lies in shreds on the floor, not ever to be resuscitated. However, we have here Basil Wolverton on the cover of this Mad Magazine. Basil Wolverton is a fascinating character. Basil Wolverton was one of the Mad Magazine artists, as you see here. And he was also a member of a cult church. It was like the Radio Church of America or something, to which he was a very devout believer. And he was so devout that he acceded to illustrate their Bible with his illustrations. And early on, I got hold of a Wolverton Bible because I was at a book dealer and I asked if he had Basil Wolverton work, looking for all my favorite cartoon artists. And again, I don't know that much about the history of cartoons, but certain artists I really responded to, like Will Elder and Basil Wolverton. And he said, well, it's the Wolverton Bible. And I said, what? And I bought them all. And I realized, oh, you could be both a Mad Magazine artist and a deeply religious person doing biblical drawings. A lot of that lit a fire under me. So I have to credit Basil Wolverton with a lot of encouragement. And that's obviously not a biblical drawing. Will Eisner, on the other hand, was a ferocious enemy of anti-Semitism and a courageous exponent of his own Jewishness. And the ability of Eisner to make his love and his identification with Jewishness so apparent in his work, as in A Contract with God and later works, most notably The Plot, which is an attack on the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and done so skillfully, had to allow this dialogue into the larger aesthetic conversation. Now, the fact that it doesn't have, you know, larger territory to cover is simply a matter of people not wanting to accept that as a topic of visual discussion. But it gave birth to people like Art Spiegelman, whose mouse is, again, one of the, there you go. Yeah, you got a slide of that. Art is one of the great.
Tell us too about your, how you intersected with Art Spiegelman at the Jewish Museum show.
Yes, the Jewish Museum had a show of American artists and Jewish American artists. And it was a good success. Wonderful artists like Audrey Flack and R.B. Kittai, I believe Irving Petlin, whom I loved, may have been in the first example of that show. And then curator Susan Goodman decided to put together a second iteration of that exhibition in 1985, I believe it was. And at that time, I had just come back from doing some exterior murals in Israel, and I was just loaded with iconographic information, which I put into my gallery exhibition of that year, that critics noticed was in fact Jewish. And I thought, you know, this Jewish stuff, now that the cat's out of the bag, an art forum critic said, you know, there's something obviously very Jewish about this work. And I thought, wow, you know, here I am showing work in a secular gallery, and the critic has recognized that there's Jewish, you know, Jewish iconography in this work. So I don't have to hold these things apart anymore. So I did a series of paintings called The Rabbis. And in The Rabbis, there we go, in the lower right-hand corner, there were like 6 of those paintings. And the painting on the top is, oh, this is wonderful. When I came back from doing the Michlala Jerusalem Teachers College murals, I had done the 7 days of creation, and those circles on the bottom of this painting is about 20 feet long. It was shown at the Phyllis Kine Gallery. So here's the merger of comic books. This is called Jimmy Swinerton and the Creation of the Universe. And the top is little Jimmy Swinerton, who was a comic book regular, taking money from his mother and going to the store and just buying some groceries. A very ordinary, matter-of-fact thing. This refers to what I mean when I say there's miracles happening every day. The fact that the kid can go to the grocery and come back is a miracle. And it's a wonderful miracle. And I juxtapose that, a word I hate to use, but in this case I have to, I paralleled that with the 7 days of creation, which was imagery from the Michlala murals. And after I had done this in a gallery situation, I started to make these pictures of rabbis, which I had no hope would ever be shown in the gallery, because I understood exactly the vulgarity, which I loved, of these Jewish characters. You know, they were not the revered, pious Hasidim sitting curling their curls while they're reading by candlelight or dancing in the street to a fiddler. These were the people I grew up with. You know, these were the leftovers of the German and Polish Jewry, who were the Viennese-style cantors in synagogues. And I just wanted to paint them as normal people, you know, not necessarily, you know, godlike, but, you know, helpful people in the community. And this was actually one of the most reproduced paintings I've ever done. The New York Times published it, Vogue magazine published it, because when they reviewed the show, reviewers thought that this was a funny painting. That is, what they thought was, yes, we can make fun of the Jews. Look, here's an artist making fun of the Jews. Now, nobody said that, but you got the feeling the reason that this painting was picked, because this painting was shown in the same show that Art Spiegelman was shown in. You figure they would have picked a panel from Maus. Anyway, this painting, The Rabbis, and Spiegelman's sketches for Maus, which hadn't come out yet, were hanging next to each other in the show. And I spent the entire evening looking at Spiegelman's sketches, and he kept drifting over to my end, and we sort of introduced each other. And I said, you know, this is dynamite. This is amazing, man. I've never seen anything like this. This is unbelievable. He said, I like your work too. And the 4 of us, Maria and I and Francoise and Art, went down to the village, Lower East Side, and we had dinner in a Polish restaurant. I remember we ate cabbage soup and stuff like that. You know, we reveled in our Yiddishkeit. And later on, I became enamored of Art's work. I think he's a damn genius. I mean, I'm not alone in that. And reading some of his early published stuff, breakdowns, he talks about comic book imagery. And he said, if you take the text away, you can basically take all of these visuals and you can recombine them in any order, and they'll make themselves a new narrative. And I thought, oh, this is very interesting. And this informs 60 paintings from the Bible. It informs the 54 chapter paintings. It informs the 613. But the first time I did it without rabbinic supervision, that is taking my lead from Art and actually not making up my own text, not making up my own comic book, but readapting a text from the Bible. This is the first time I did that. And after that, all bets were off. You know, once I freed myself from the, for lack of a better word, from the tyranny of the rabbinic mashgiach. I mean, a rabbi doesn't know any more about art than he knows about pork chops. So why am I taking nonsense from a rabbi? There's no visual tradition in the rabbinic tradition, nor should there be. So I was free to re-engage the artistic priority or primacy and use the religious armature as a narrative tether rather than as my directive, which is what happened in 60 Paintings of Revival. When Samantha came to look at the series, I took them down from the studio, which was on the second floor, and laid them out on the living room floor. And much to her credit, she was able to decipher some kind of unity from this mess. I just laid them all over the house. You'll see in the background on the walls some of my collection. There's a Katja Kolditz and a Martin Ramirez. There's a Philip Guston, Franz Klein sketch. There's 3 Tim Rollins. These are people I like. Samantha, you want to say something, or?
When I first came to Archie's place to see this series, it was quite remarkable. I said to him, I'd like to see a few paintings in person so I can see the paint handling and really get a sense of scale. He disappears, he comes back down with boxes, and he just pulls them all out. So this is 60 paintings from the Bible, strewn all over his living room, on the piano. It's everywhere. It was remarkable. It was a great experience. I fell in love with the paintings, and I decided we had to do a show. I must do a show about this series. And we're running out of time, Archie. Okay. So I want to say a few words. This is the first time that Archie put all the works up in person. It's in his studio. He could survey everything that he did. And he told me one time that 60 paintings from the Bible is supposed to be a rush of images, like a whirlwind that confronts the viewer, almost like a mural. Right. And so when he hung them like this, he could get a sense of that. And then the first time we had them hung to get, in our curated show is 2016 at the galleries at Cleveland State University. And so they were shown in a very different way. They had a chance to breathe. So Archie, you want to say a few words about this and how it made you feel to have them in this kind of environment?
Yeah, it was fabulous. And this is a perfect example of what Art was talking about in Breakdowns, when he said that you could rearrange any of these images and have them form their own sort of cacophonous realignment of narrative. And the breathing space that you had given the hanging in this show was such a gift, such a blessing. The gallery is enormous, and I'd never imagined through and absorb each picture. In fact, I myself never had the space to do that. So I was walking through this show as if I'd never seen these paintings before, because I wasn't trained, but I had a lot of early experience as a mural painter. So one of the reasons I work in series is I'm deconstructing the mural into serial components. And this was the first time I could actually read each one. It's sort of like going to, not that I should disgrace his holy name, but going to a Delacroix and like looking at just, a pot of coins, or the edge of a bedspread, or the head of the king, or I'm thinking of the death of Sardanapalus, just taking every individual component and examining it. And this was the first time when you hung the show this way. I mean, it's sort of weird. We're making a document here, and we're giving kudos to each other, but I was very, very grateful and very relieved and very surprised to be able to see each of these paintings as individual objects of both mediation and meditation. And you can see from these photographs, they really give them a lot of space to breathe, and it was just terrific. And again, it's at the Skirball now, and it's been laid out in such a way, kind of brilliantly. Oh, and here it was that was the American Jewish Museum in Pittsburgh, where they're a bit more, the way I had painted them, sort of cheek by jowl, yeah. Then the way that they're hung now in the Skirball was brilliantly laid out. The walls are sort of laid in at angles, so you can walk around almost as if in a maze and individually confront each picture. So I'm extremely grateful for the Skirball hanging. I'm very honored to be hanging there now, or mounted there. I shouldn't say I'm hanging. And I'm going to stop talking too much.
All right, so Archie, want to see if there's any questions. It's been a great run together. I've loved having the show up in 3 venues. We're hoping after the pandemic, we can have them in 3 more venues at least. And so let's open this up to any questions.
Yeah, and if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. There are some lovely comments. Isaac Brynjegard Bialik, who will be our speaker in 2 weeks, December 2nd, has said, "I'm a big fan of Archie's work. Hearing him speak about it in context with his inspiration and sources is fascinating." Norman Finkelstein gave us the author of The Ordeal of Civility. It's by John Cudahy. So that was a recollection that he had. You mentioned the radio church concept. It was called the Worldwide Church of God. So someone has provided that. And I just want to say, you know, lots of people are saying wonderful presentation. Thanks so much. I just have to say, it is so wonderful to have both of you. Samantha, you have curated this show every way that a person can curate, from the actual physical show that is on view at the Skirball to curating this conversation and helping us to bring out so many aspects of the work. For those of us who've seen the work, now I can't wait to go back and see it again, because hearing you and hearing Archie, I'm reminded of so many aspects of this that I've sort of lost in translation, and now I want to go back and experience that. So in so many ways, this has been so meaningful to be able to have an eye into your studio, Archie, to see your process. And I think everyone agrees. I mean, the comments are just piling up about how wonderful and what a rare and special experience this has been. So thank you both so much. Marie, I'm gonna turn it back to you and see if there's anything else that you wanna say at this point.
Perfect. Thanks, Abby. I'll let everyone know that we are recording today, so we will get this up on the ISH and Skirball websites as soon as we can. We'll send you out an email to let you know that it's up. What an incredible treat. Archie, thank you so much for sharing your incredible work with us. Samantha, thank you so much for giving us better insight and helping us draw connections to Archie's work and his inspiration. This call today would have been something less without each of you, so thank you so much. As Abby mentioned, we are really thrilled to invite you all to join us for our final of our 3-session series for Graphic Jews, Storytelling Through Art. And as Abby mentioned, and Isaac has led some comments today, which is so wonderful. I hope you'll all join us on December 2nd, same time at noon, for these Lunch and Learn series. They're a real treat. Anyway, I hope everyone has a really wonderful rest of your week, healthy and safe meals or travels if you are making travel plans, but stay healthy, everyone, over the coming week.